Vanity of the vanities, says the teacher. Vanity of the vanities. All is vanity. Such are the words of the anonymous wise man responsible for the book of Ecclesiastes. For as the stars rise and fall, and new generations roam creation, man appears no closer than in Eden to escaping the transience of life. The question of meaning is one Christians often neglect, relegating it to the nihilistic worldview ascribed to many atheists, as no one in their right mind could possibly believe our world to be meaningless. I, however, wish to challenge this assumption, using two of Kierkegaard's most influential works, arguing that our world is fundamentally absurd and meaningless. That is, if not for the meaning we create through what he dubs the eternal wellspring. This will be a fundamentally Christian existentialist stance, but one that does not simply parrot the arguments of the aforementioned Danish philosopher, instead applying a much-needed tinge of romanticism, whilst comparing it with the views of dissenters and demonstrating their ability to coexist. Fear and Trembling, first published by Kierkegaard in 1843, is a deeply meditative work, discussing the biblical story of Abraham and the binding of Isaac contained within. The philosopher used the tale to discuss the irrationality of faith, haunted by Abraham's ability to both raise a knife against his son whilst still believing he could have him. Amidst his exposition, he referenced the proverb, "Only one who works gets the bread," with the bread symbolizing wealth, power, and influence. A saying, as subsequently displayed, remains deeply unapplicable to our world. For so often the reality exists that one who does not work gets the bread, or one who sleeps gets more bread than one who rises early. To believe that anything is guaranteed through action alone is folly, for a proverb such as this could only apply in a perfectly just creation, one we do not reside in. Yet beyond the veil of reality, in the world of spirit, such a proverb rings ever true. As Kierkegaard writes, "Here there rules an eternal and divine law. Here it does not rain both on the righteous and the unrighteous. Here the sun shines not both on the good and the evil. Here it holds that only the one who works gets the bread. Only the one who is in anxiety finds peace. Only the one who descends into the underworld saves the beloved, and only the one who draws the knife gets Isaac." To be Christian is to acknowledge that we are made in the image of perfection, though we ourselves are not. Any who do not affirm this, I dare say, cannot call themselves Christian in the Nicene sense. For does our creed not say, "I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of his Father before all worlds, God of God, light of light, very God of very God"? If this were not the case, then God could have never become man, and all hope would have long left. Yet even still, our world's salvation acknowledges an inextricable marring. Therefore, a belief in Christianity necessitates a gap in our understanding. And this gap is the absurd. As our minds long for justice, rationality, and without hesitation, perfection. It is for this reason that subscribers to this belief, namely myself, uphold the impossibility of a single, all-encompassing logical system, and furthermore, the impropriety of apologetics. For imperfection cannot prove perfection, and attempting to do so would destroy the faith itself. The tale of Abraham was utilized by Kierkegaard to explore this very concept, as the father of all nations did not believe the binding of Isaac was a test of his faith. He irrationally believed that he could both raise the knife and have his son all at once. For this is the only way he could not have deeply betrayed his duty as a father, and the only way he could not have lied to Sarah. What occurred was what Kierkegaard deemed a teleological suspension of the ethical, where his duty to the highest good overrode moral law, requiring an action only possible to commit if the actor attaches himself to what he dubbed the endless wellspring, from which all meaning originates. When this occurs, when one infinitely resigns their desire for worldly possessions while still believing in their possibility by the strength of the absurd, they follow in the steps of Abraham and become what Kierkegaard dubbed a knight of faith. The best example to describe this phenomenon is one he gave concerning love. Two knights are smitten with a princess, yet each knows the match to be impossible. One becomes a knight of infinite resignation, not releasing his love, but accepting that it will never come to fruition. Such an action would be praised by many and understood by many more. He is sacrificing his life for the happiness of another, as Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter for the safety of his men. Yet doing so relegates him to our world of imperfection. The knight of faith, on the other hand, does all the actions of the former, yet on the strength of the absurd, believes the love to still be possible. When this occurs, his love becomes not transient, but eternal. For what is faith but endless, unrequited love that irrationally believes in its fulfillment? It's for this reason that Kierkegaard fundamentally believed that to love was the most important commandment given to Christians, and therefore a means of meaning. Taken from the words of Christ, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." He upheld this as the most perfect form of love achievable by man, declaring that when one dwells within it, he becomes invulnerable to the scorn of others, for he already has access to God himself. It is here, however, where I feel Kierkegaard missteps. He correctly writes, to defraud oneself of love is the most terrible deception of all. However, throughout Works of Love, from which this quote originates, he spent significant time attacking what he deemed to be erotic love, i.e., that between two people, as a bastardization of the divine, and in doing so, missed the forest for the trees. There is no better example of this than his misuse of Greek legend. Quote, "He who will not work does not get the bread, but will be deluded, as the gods deluded Orpheus, deluded him because he was tender-hearted, not courageous, because he was a lyre player, not a man." The tale of Orpheus was a tragedy, not due to his masculinity, but because one who would not look upon Eurydice would not have ventured into Hades. A tragedy because the deep love between a man and his wife, a conduit for the very wellspring Kierkegaard described, was the reason he failed to save her. For that is exactly what love is, not a bastardization of perfection, but an imperfect means of understanding it. I mention the myth of Orpheus for the same reason Boethius relayed the tale a millennium prior, because to turn your eyes upon the beloved is to forsake your faith in God, and therefore forsake your faith in love itself. The poem was one of three major sources throughout the Middle Ages, deeply influencing both Alfred the Great's retelling and the Middle English tale of Sir Orfeo, though more lasting still was the philosophy which surrounded it. Boethius penned the Consolation of Philosophy whilst in prison awaiting his execution at the hands of Theodoric the Great. The text, through a dialogue structure, discusses the nature of good and evil and the folly of fortune, as one's happiness must be placed in something higher if there is any hope for its eternity, for everything in this world is merely transient. As put by Lady Philosophy, "You know there is no constancy in human affairs, when a single swift hour can bring a man to nothing." Boethius, after all, suffered this very fate, quickly moving from high Roman patrician to death-bound criminal. And it's for this reason that he advocated for placing one's meaning in God rather than fortune. However, his means of reaching this conclusion could not have been further from existentialist thought, for Boethius was heavily influenced by Neoplatonism, a wide and ranging tradition of philosophical practices arising in the 3rd century as a continuation of Platonic thought. The concept is notoriously diverse and far beyond the scope of this video and, frankly, my abilities. But in its most simple terms, the school merged the Aristotelian need of a first cause, basically the explanation for why anything exists, with the Platonic ideals, such as the highest good. Later Christians would use these terms as a means of describing the nature and essence of God, one of whom was Boethius. Quote, "But the existence of this good, and its function as a kind of fountainhead of all good things, cannot be denied, for everything that is said to be imperfect is held to be so by the absence of perfection." He follows this by placing God as the highest good, demonstrating his necessity if one were to accept Platonic ideals, which he deems necessary via his argument from imperfection. One may characterize this view as Christian rationalism, and doing so I don't think would be improper. But it's worth discussing the similarities to the existentialist views I earlier described. Firstly, it's worth noting that Boethius was not using a philosophic lens to convince others of God's divinity, but justifying existing faith. The world of late antiquity was not that of Kierkegaard's enlightenment. The idea of transcendent perfection was not something to be convinced of. It was a self-evident truth. I would argue, however, that such a self-evident truth is itself a leap of faith, for no proof has yet arisen. Perfection is real in as far as it can be conceived, yet conceiving is not existing, thus necessitating faith to fill that gap. Faith that is in itself absurd, demonstrating how even a rational Christian belief system cannot rely solely upon it. I feel it necessary, however, to say that irrationality is not and should not be considered negative. It's merely descriptive. Faith is as irrational and unconditional as love and ought not be viewed any differently. However, what such a view requires is a turn away from legalistic understandings of Christianity. The morality of creation and purpose of our lives is certainly supported by the Holy Scriptures, but to treat the writings of man as their only source is to gravely misinterpret the faith. Slavoj Žižek in 2024 wrote a very controversial piece regarding morality titled, "If There is a God, Then Anything is Permitted," highlighting the dangerous manner in which higher belief can upend self-evident moral practices. He uses examples of both direct persecution by religious leaders and depravity born from supposed higher goods in totalitarian states, whilst criticizing the arbitrary nature of Augustine's "love God and do as you please," and the fundamentalist twisting of Kierkegaard's ethical suspension. Now, I agree the latter is certainly depraved, and would second the former if we assume Augustine's saying was the no true Scotsman fundamentalists espouse. However, I don't believe that must be the case, as existentialist views address this problem forthright. If you acknowledge that life is absurd and human rationality has its limits, then you need not worry about what Žižek described as the God that failed. For to claim any sure knowledge of where you stand in relation to God is hubris, and fulfilling his will by any means other than the wellspring is mistaken. Though it was meant as a caricature, Žižek correctly wrote, "If you dwell in divine love, then you do not need prohibitions," because such a practice is not a free pass for whatever one pleases, but a call to action. One to attach ourselves to the wellspring by fulfilling the first and great commandment, with the second like unto it, to love thy neighbor as thyself. And in this regard, we are not the blind leading the blind, for we have a figure to emulate, that of Christ. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all soon.